Muammar Gaddafi wasn't just any leader. He was one of Africa's most unforgettable rulers. He spent decades shaping Libya and pushing for a bold vision, a united Africa under one government. Love him or hate him, there's no denying he left a mark that still sparks debate today. Even after ruling Libya for over 40 years, Gaddafi wasn't done dreaming. He had massive ambitions, not just for his country but for the entire continent. But his story didn't end the way he imagined. His fall from power wasn't just about politics, it was a tangled web of trust, betrayal, and power struggles. One betrayal in particular shook him the most. It wasn't just any betrayal, it came from someone he deeply trusted, a leader he considered a friend, a country he had shown nothing but love and support for. And in the end, that very same leader turned his back on him. So which country was it? And who was this leader that pulled the ultimate betrayal? The answer: Uganda. And the man who switched sides, none other than Ugandan President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Now here's where things get even more interesting. In 2016, Museveni openly criticised the US and the European Union for their role in toppling Gaddafi. He even called out their interference in Libya and the Middle East, arguing that they had no business removing leaders like Gaddafi and Iraq's Saddam Hussein. But if he felt this way, why did he betray Gaddafi in the first place? What changed? To understand that, we need to rewind a bit, back to when their friendship first began, and how things took a turn neither of them saw coming. Gaddafi's bond with Uganda didn't begin with Museveni. It went way back, long before he ever came to power. It all started in the 1970s, during the reign of Idi Amin. Gaddafi wasn't just an ally, he was one of Amin's strongest supporters. Whenever Amin's government faced a crisis, there was always one person who stepped in to help: Muammar Gaddafi. Whether it was military aid, financial support, or political backing, Libya was always there for Uganda. Every time Amin found himself under attack, Gaddafi was the one sending troops, weapons, and resources to keep his regime afloat. But despite all the loyalty and assistance, Gaddafi's relationship with Uganda would eventually take a shocking turn, one that ended in betrayal. Speaking of shocking turns, if you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more fascinating stories. Now, back to the story. By 1979, Idi Amin's time was up. Facing mounting resistance, he was forced to flee Uganda. His first stop, Libya. But even Gaddafi couldn't keep him there for long. Eventually, Amin relocated to Saudi Arabia, where he lived out the rest of his days. With Amin gone, Uganda scrambled to find new leadership. Elections were held in 1980, but not everyone was happy with the results. One man in particular refused to accept defeat: Yoweri Museveni. Determined to take power, Museveni declared the election rigged and launched a rebellion. What followed was a brutal civil war, with Museveni's forces fighting to overthrow the government. But there was one major problem. His army was running out of weapons. Museveni was desperate. He needed help. And fast. His first move, he turned to the US and the UK, hoping they would supply him with arms. But there was a catch. His ties to Gaddafi made Western powers hesitant to get involved. With nowhere else to turn, Museveni made a bold decision. He reached out to the one man who had always supported Uganda, the one leader who had stood by the country for years, Muammar Gaddafi. And just like before, Gaddafi didn't hesitate. He sent military aid, supplies, and weapons. And with that help, Museveni came out victorious. Gaddafi's support didn't stop there. He continued backing Uganda, even during the intense 1986 civil war that cemented Museveni's rule. But little did he know, the same man he had helped rise to power would one day become the very person who turned against him. After Paul Kawanga Semogarere's defeat, Libya stepped in to train Museveni's military forces. That alone was a huge gesture of support, but it didn't stop there. Museveni was so inspired by Libya's intelligence operations that he even named his own secret agency after theirs. That's how much influence Gaddafi had on him. That's how much trust and admiration there was between the two. Gaddafi didn't just see Uganda as another African country, he treated it like his second home. He visited so often that people joked he might as well have been a Ugandan citizen. But his connection to the country wasn't just symbolic, he poured massive amounts of money into it. Through the Libyan African portfolio, Gaddafi took over 51% of Uganda Telecom, one of the country's biggest telecommunications companies. He also secured a 60% stake in TriStar Limited, a major textile company. And that was just the beginning. One of Gaddafi's boldest moves was convincing Museveni to hold on to Uganda's oil. While Western nations were eager to buy the country's unrefined crude, Gaddafi had a different idea. He urged Museveni not to sell it off, but instead build an oil refinery and pipelines connecting Uganda to Kenya and other neighbouring nations. And the investments didn't stop there. Gaddafi went all in on Uganda's economy, pouring money into real estate, banking and infrastructure. He had a hand in the Tropical Bank of Africa, the National Housing Corporation, Lake Victoria Hotel, and several other major businesses. But Gaddafi's influence wasn't just economic, it was also military. Through Museveni, he played a secret but powerful role in the Rwandan conflict. When the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, launched an invasion in 1980, Gaddafi provided them with weapons and support. And guess who made sure those arms reached them? The Ugandan government under Museveni. The bond between these two leaders ran deep, which is exactly why what happened next felt like the ultimate betrayal. But before we get to that, there's another piece of the story worth mentioning: Gaddafi's fascination with the Turo kingdom. In 2001, Gaddafi became deeply interested in this small but historically rich monarchy within Uganda's borders. What made this especially intriguing was that its king, Oyo Nyimba, was just 9 years old at the time. Yet despite his young age, Gaddafi showered the kingdom with attention and support, further cementing his connection to Uganda. Muammar Gaddafi's influence in Uganda wasn't just political or economic, it extended into culture, religion, and even military affairs. One of his most striking contributions was in the Turo kingdom, where he funded major projects including the construction of the Grand Turo Palace. But Gaddafi's generosity didn't stop there. He also left an unforgettable mark on Uganda's Muslim community. His financial support helped build one of the most stunning mosques in the country, a massive structure capable of holding at least 3,000 worshippers. Today it stands as the second largest mosque in East Africa, a lasting testament to his deep involvement in Uganda. His connection with Museveni was just as personal as it was strategic. During his many visits, Gaddafi openly joked with him about staying in power forever. He even questioned why Museveni bothered with elections at all, hinting that he should just rule for life. And it wasn't all talk. Gaddafi backed Museveni in significant ways. He played a direct role in boosting Museveni's influence, even promoting his son in the military, elevating him from captain to major. When it came to Ugandan elections, Gaddafi was right there in Museveni's corner. In both the 2001 and 2006 presidential campaigns, he provided crucial support, helping Museveni secure victory. From the outside, their relationship seemed ironclad, built on trust, loyalty, and years of mutual benefit. But as history has shown, no alliance is ever truly unbreakable. So what changed? What led Museveni to turn his back on Gaddafi after years of unwavering support? To understand this betrayal, we need to look at two major factors: Western interests and Gaddafi's ambitious vision for Africa. If you've ever heard talk of a United States of Africa, chances are Gaddafi's name came up. He was one of the most vocal advocates for a single, unified African government, an idea that sparked both admiration and alarm. Like Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah before him, Muammar Gaddafi was determined to unite Africa under one powerful bloc. In 1989, during a major summit, he managed to convince 45 African leaders to approve the creation of a new organisation, the African Union. This replaced the decades-old Organization of African Unity and was meant to bring African nations closer together. But Gaddafi wasn't just thinking about unity on paper, he had a much bigger dream, a United States of Africa. His vision, a single African government with one currency and one military, strong enough to stand on its own against global powers. And he wasn't just talking, he put his money where his mouth was, funding roughly 15% of the African Union's budget during his time in power. But not everyone was on board. Western powers saw this idea as a direct challenge to their influence in Africa. And even within the continent, some leaders weren't too keen on handing over any control. A powerful, united Africa meant their individual influence would shrink. Surprisingly, one of the strongest voices against Gaddafi's dream was none other than Yoweri Museveni. Yes, the same Museveni who had benefited greatly from Gaddafi's support. The same leader who had received military aid, financial backing, and political favours from Libya. Despite everything Gaddafi had done for him, Museveni wasn't willing to embrace this vision of unity. But why? What made him turn his back on Gaddafi's plan? For starters, Museveni wasn't about to let go of his own power. He had worked too hard to establish control over Uganda, and the idea of answering to a higher African authority didn't sit well with him. Gaddafi's grand vision might have excited others, but to Museveni, it was a direct threat to his leadership. He spoke about Gaddafi's plans in a careful, diplomatic way, never openly attacking the idea, but also never fully supporting it. It was clear that while he appreciated Gaddafi's ambitions, he had no interest in giving up any of his own influence. For Museveni, it was simple. If anyone was going to lead, it had to be him. No exceptions. Museveni wasn't just a leader in Uganda, he was becoming a key player in regional politics. His growing influence extended far beyond his borders, and he quickly became a valuable ally to Western powers. His military played a major role in conflicts across Africa, especially in Somalia, where Ugandan troops were deployed to serve Western interests. But Museveni wasn't just offering soldiers, he also provided strategic support, sharing intelligence and working closely with agencies like the CIA. At one point, he even bragged about taking a stand against Gaddafi long before others did, repeating, "I was fighting Gaddafi before you even started." That statement alone made it clear where his priorities lay. So when Gaddafi's dream of a united Africa was formally discussed at an African Union summit in Accra, Ghana, in 2007, Museveni wasted no time in shutting it down. He strongly opposed the idea, knowing it could put him at odds with the very powers that helped keep him in control. Backing Gaddafi's vision would have meant challenging the West, and that was a risk Museveni wasn't willing to take. He understood that the same forces propping him up could just as easily remove him from power if he stepped out of line. But at the same time, turning his back on Gaddafi wasn't without its risks. The Libyan leader had been a major source of financial and military support for Uganda, and breaking ties with him could leave Museveni vulnerable. Still, he made his choice. During a visit to the United States on June 13, 2008, while attending his son's graduation, Museveni had a private discussion with Jendai Fraser, the US Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. In that conversation, he made it clear that he didn't see a united Africa as a realistic idea. He pointed out the continent's diverse languages and cultures as obstacles and accused Gaddafi of using money to buy the support of smaller nations, making it difficult for them to express their true opinions at international meetings. Museveni also had another fear, one that went beyond politics. As tensions between him and Gaddafi escalated, he started to worry that the Libyan leader might try to take him out. He feared that his plane could be targeted while flying through international airspace. So he made a bold move. He reached out to the United States for protection, and Washington was more than happy to provide it. For Gaddafi, Museveni's growing ties with the West weren't his biggest concern. What really unsettled him was how Museveni's influence in Uganda kept expanding, making it harder for him to push his own agenda. Then in 2008, Gaddafi made a surprise visit to Uganda. His arrival wasn't just a diplomatic stop, It sent shockwaves through Museveni's government. Some even suspected it was part of a larger plan to challenge Museveni's rule. During a speech at an Arab youth event, Gaddafi made a bold statement. He shifted the conversation away from elected leaders like Museveni and declared that his new strategy was to work directly with traditional African rulers. His goal? To unite Africa under a single leadership, not through politicians, but through kings and chiefs who had deep historical ties to their people. The following year, Gaddafi put his plan into action. He invited traditional leaders from across Africa to discuss his vision for a united continent. But before Uganda's rulers could even consider attending, Museveni blocked them from going. He saw this move for what it was, a direct challenge to his authority. What Gaddafi didn't know was that Museveni had already been working behind the scenes to weaken him. Museveni convinced him that the US had turned a new page and was willing to invest in Libya, under one condition. Gaddafi had to give up his weapons of mass destruction. Gaddafi agreed, believing that dismantling his nuclear program would bring Libya closer to the West. But after private talks with British diplomats, he discovered something shocking. Museveni had sold him out. The Libyan leader was left questioning everything. He had trusted promises that now seemed empty. Publicly, he began demanding answers, saying that Libya had kept its end of the deal, but was still waiting for the benefits it had been promised. "We were told that President Bush is a man of his word," he said, "but now we're not so sure." Gaddafi had made a critical mistake, one that would cost him everything. He had willingly surrendered his most powerful bargaining chip, leaving himself exposed at a time when enemies were closing in from all sides. Since Gaddafi's downfall, Museveni has tried to position himself as the new champion of African unity, especially in finance and security. But there's a problem. While he has influence, he doesn't have the larger-than-life charisma or the deep pockets that made Gaddafi's vision seem possible. Even if Museveni pushes forward with this idea, he's unlikely to find much support. The very forces that worked against Gaddafi would see him as a threat too. And ironically, these are the same Western powers he once sided with when he turned his back on Gaddafi. In 2021, Museveni made a surprising statement, criticising the narrow-minded approach of these Western nations, the same ones he had once helped in their mission to eliminate Gaddafi. The shift in his tone was noticeable, but it didn't change history. The damage had already been done. One of the clearest signs of Gaddafi's erasure came when Uganda renamed the Grand Mosque he had funded and built. Originally named after him, the mosque lost its title just 2 years after his death, a move meant to smooth relations with Libya's new government. Museveni's biggest mistake may not have been his alliance with the West. It was betraying the one African leader he had always feared. Now, as time moves forward, one thing is certain. When Museveni's own reign eventually comes to an end, there won't be anyone left to shield him from the forces that once worked in his favour. If you found this video informative,